Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're diving into the twisted and terrifying case of Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. From his charming demeanor to his chilling brutality, Bundy's story has fascinated and horrified people for decades. But beneath that charm was a monster who left a trail of destruction across several states. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more in-depth looks at the world's most chilling true crime stories. Ted Bundy seemed like the perfect citizen. He was intelligent, good-looking, and charismatic, traits that made him seem like the last person anyone would suspect of horrific crimes. But behind the facade was a deeply disturbed man with violent tendencies. Born in 1946, Bundy grew up in what many thought was a normal environment. However, Bundy's early life had dark undercurrents. He was raised by his grandparents, believing his mother was his sister, a fact that would later come to light and add layers to his psychological profile. By the 1970s, Ted Bundy had become a law student and was active in politics. But behind the scenes, something far darker was brewing. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy committed a series of gruesome murders, targeting young women in multiple states, including Washington, Utah, and Colorado. His victims were often lured by his charm. He would pretend to be injured, asking for help, before overpowering them. Ted Bundy's ability to manipulate his victims was one of the most terrifying aspects of his crimes. His modus operandi was carefully calculated to exploit the trust and empathy of young women, making it almost impossible for them to suspect any danger. Bundy often chose public places like college campuses, parks, and beaches, blending in as just another face in the crowd. His victims were usually young women, often with similar physical traits, long hair parted in the middle, and many of them resembled his former girlfriend, a detail that's widely noted in criminal profiling. Bundy was known to feign vulnerability as a tactic. He often pretended to be injured or incapacitated to lure his victims closer. Whether using a fake arm cast, crutches, or a leg brace, Bundy crafted the image of a helpless man needing assistance. He would typically approach women in broad daylight, asking them for help carrying books or loading items into his car, an old, beat-up Volkswagen Beetle, a signature piece of his killings. Once the women were close enough, he would overpower them with brutal force, knocking them unconscious before abducting them. Bundy's method wasn't just about brute strength, though. It was about gaining the trust of his victims, appearing as someone they could help. His charm and good looks played a critical role, making him appear non-threatening and even likable. Once his victims were lured into his vehicle, he would use handcuffs to restrain them, leaving them no chance of escape. It was in his car that the nightmare truly began. Bundy was also meticulous in planning his crimes. He kept a kill kit in his car, which included items like crowbars, handcuffs, rope, and even masks. This level of premeditation shows just how organized he was in his approach. Bundy knew exactly what he needed to execute his crimes and to dispose of evidence efficiently. Once Bundy had his victim restrained, he would drive them to a secluded area, often miles away from where he had abducted them. There, he would sexually assault and murder them, sometimes bludgeoning them with a blunt object or strangling them. He would then leave the bodies in remote locations, making it difficult for authorities to link him to the crimes. In some cases, Bundy would even return to the bodies days or weeks later to perform necrophilic acts. Bundy's post-mortem interactions with his victims were one of the most disturbing elements of his crimes. He would often return to visit the bodies of his victims, grooming and redressing them, even applying makeup in some cases. These horrific acts highlight his deep psychological disturbance and need for control over his victims, even in death. Bundy's ability to blend into society, to lure women into trusting him, and to commit such brutal acts of violence without being caught for years is what made him one of the most feared serial killers of the 20th century. His charm and intelligence allowed him to evade suspicion for years, while his meticulous planning and calculated method of attack made him all the more dangerous. What made Bundy particularly unique was his ability to compartmentalize his life. He could appear as a normal, successful law student, a charming man involved in politics, while at the same time carrying out a series of brutal murders across state lines. It was this duality that allowed him to evade capture for so long, as his ability to transform from a trusted face to a killer was almost unimaginable. January 15, 1978, Tallahassee, Florida. After months on the run following his second prison escape, Ted Bundy arrived at Florida State University, ready to commit one of his most horrifying crimes. That night, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house, where he would unleash a brutal attack that would forever cement his reputation as one of America's most vicious serial killers. Shortly after 3 a.m., while many of the students were fast asleep, Bundy slipped into the sorority house unnoticed. Armed with a club and his usual brutal intent, Bundy attacked 4 women within a matter of minutes. He entered Margaret Bowman's room first, bludgeoning her to death with the club and strangling her with a pair of pantyhose. He then moved to Lisa Levy's room, where he repeated the same gruesome assault, beating her with the club and biting her, leaving behind one of the critical pieces of evidence that would later lead to his conviction. Bundy didn't stop there. After attacking Bowman and Levy, he moved to the next room, where he viciously assaulted Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, both of whom miraculously survived the attack, but were left with severe injuries, including broken jaws and facial trauma. Bundy, however, wasn't finished. He exited the sorority house and made his way to an apartment a few blocks away, where he attacked 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas in her sleep. Thomas also survived, but sustained permanent damage, including hearing loss and a broken jaw. Just a few weeks later, on February 15, 1978, Ted Bundy was finally apprehended after a routine traffic stop in Pensacola, Florida. Patrol Officer David Lee noticed Bundy's suspicious behavior and pulled him over. As Lee attempted to arrest him, Bundy fled on foot but was quickly captured. At the time of his arrest, Bundy was driving a stolen car, and inside, police found multiple IDs and stolen credit cards from previous victims, as well as items that linked him to several other murders. After months of evading law enforcement and escaping justice, Bundy's killing spree had finally come to an end. The nation breathed a sigh of relief, but for the victims and their families, the horror was far from over. In the months that followed, Bundy would be charged with multiple murders, including those at the Chi Omega sorority house, and eventually brought to trial. During his trial, Bundy's behavior in court was as bizarre as ever. He represented himself, often cross-examining witnesses, and used his charm to try to manipulate the jury. But the evidence was overwhelming. The bite mark on Lisa Levy's body, matched to Bundy's dental impressions, became one of the key pieces of evidence that would ultimately lead to his conviction. Bundy's trial was unique, not only because of the media frenzy, but also due to Bundy's bizarre behavior. In an unprecedented move, Bundy opted to represent himself during the trial, firing his legal counsel and often speaking directly to the jury. He believed that his intelligence and charm would sway the court in his favor, and to some extent, his confidence on the stand only increased the public's morbid fascination with him. Even more shocking was Bundy's appeal to the public. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, he developed an unusual fan base, particularly among young women. Dozens of women attended the trial, some even professing their love for him. Bundy's clean-cut appearance and suave demeanor seemed to make it impossible for these followers to reconcile the gruesome murders with the man sitting in front of them. Bundy's fan club became a phenomenon in its own right, with some women reportedly convinced of his innocence or even attracted to his criminal notoriety. This led to a strange dynamic in the courtroom, as spectators simultaneously cheered him on and recoiled in horror at the evidence presented. This breakthrough in forensic science played a pivotal role in Bundy's conviction. Prosecutors presented detailed comparisons of Bundy's teeth and the bite marks, leaving little doubt about his involvement in the murders. Bundy, of course, attempted to discredit the analysis, but the jury found it compelling, and it was a key factor in sealing his fate. On July 24, 1979, after a 6-week trial and 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Bundy was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the Chi Omega murders, as well as 3 counts of attempted murder for his attacks on Karen Chandler, Kathy Kleiner, and Cheryl Thomas. The conviction wasn't just a victory for the victims' families, it was a watershed moment for forensic science and criminal justice. The verdict didn't come as a surprise, but what followed certainly did. During the penalty phase of the trial, Bundy stunned the courtroom once again. Taking full advantage of an obscure Florida law that recognized marriage declarations made in open court, Bundy proposed to his longtime girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, while she testified on his behalf. She accepted, and in a bizarre twist, the two were considered legally married. Despite his antics in court, Bundy was ultimately sentenced to death for the Chi Omega murders. As the sentence was read, Bundy reportedly showed little emotion, though his charm and bravado continued to fascinate the public. He would go on to be tried and convicted for multiple murders in other states, but this trial in Miami marked the beginning of the end for Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's reign of terror finally came to an end on January 24, 1989, when he was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Crowds gathered outside the prison, cheering and holding signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." For many, this was the long-awaited justice for the innocent lives he had destroyed. However, Ted Bundy's legacy remains one of fear and fascination. His ability to blend in with society while committing horrific crimes has made him one of the most infamous serial killers in history. His story serves as a chilling reminder that evil can sometimes wear the mask of normalcy. Ted Bundy's case changed how law enforcement and criminal psychologists approach serial killers. He was one of the first high-profile cases that highlighted the importance of criminal profiling, as well as how charm and manipulation can hide the darkest of intentions.